Okay. Hello, hello, hello. Do I need a little bell, don't I? Hi, everybody. Welcome back. If you don't mind taking your seats for our next part of today's sessions. Okay, so welcome back, day 3. Whew. And we have sunshine. Yay! I know, you don't know what I did last night to get this, but anyway, let's not go there. Okay, so just a couple of reminders. So if anybody would like to have a little walk in the sunshine later on today and explore our campus, there will be 2 opportunities, one at 2:30 and one at 3:15. And all you need to do is be in the entrance part of the Babbage building, so where you would go into the Babbage building. If you just wait there, then our lovely Tony will take you on a little walk around our campus. We have lunch here again at 1 o'clock, and at 1:30 we're going to have some very short, snappy, lightning talks from our exhibitors. So please give them a little bit of your time while you're eating, and don't forget that you can check out our exhibitors and our sponsors on the SpotMe app, and obviously the stands are there. We have the special interest group, the SIG World Cafe, running again today at 2 o'clock in 410 in the Babbage building. So if you didn't manage to go over yesterday, it was really great, a real buzz. But the SIG leaders will be there again today from 2 o'clock. If you're joining us for the conference dinner tonight, I hope you are, there's a welcome drink at 6:30 to 7-ish. And if you want to walk down from the campus, then our lovely Leon and Margaret of the Umbrella will walk people down to the National Marine Aquarium. If you want to go back and freshen up and meet us there, could you please be there by 7 o'clock? And we'll be sitting down to eat at 7:30. I think that's it from me. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to Anna, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker.
Hi, everyone. It is my honour to introduce you all to today's keynote speaker, Dr. Ramsey Merabet from the University of Leeds. Ramsey came to the UK in 2017 as a student, only to realise that he is an international student. In his research, Ramsey draws on his own experiences as a student labelled international and exposes the existing and unchallenged mechanisms and attitudes which perpetuate inequalities and dehumanising narratives while internationalisation strategies intensify across the sector. His insights inspire a call to acknowledge our responsibilities to rethink the direction of UK higher education and to interrogate neoliberalism and deficit narratives. Welcome, Ramsey.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation. Can you hear me well? We can run a test. 1 international student, 2 international students. People in the back, can you hear me? Yeah, good. All right. Let's test this. Tech. It's not working.
It is working.
Oh, okay, it is working now. Not working. Great, thank you so much. Let's start now. All right. To be honest, I came here already tired of repeating the same thing over and over again. I have no idea whether this plenary will be any different in terms of influence or impact, but it's definitely worth a try. I'm speaking in front of people who could be doing many other things right now. The weather is slowly improving. And based on my weekend discovery walk, I can confirm Plymouth has a lot to offer. Most people here traveled long distances as well. So today I'm making it my my task to try to speak as openly, as honestly as possible, without thinking too much about the implications of what I'm saying. I hate labels. Labels simplify complexity, allow us to explain what we imagine to be different, and enable us to justify deficit, othering, and depersonalization. Labels dehumanize individuals. They reduce a person's complex life to a single marker. By using labels at face value, we end up exerting influence on the lives, choices, and realities of individuals who did not choose the label in the first place. And no matter how much we change our lexis around the label, be it through claiming to work with, rather than on or about international students, claiming to adopt a social justice or decolonial approach, claiming to accommodate difference, researchers and practitioners cannot escape the status quo if they don't subvert the power structures that maintain the label. I'm starting this keynote with 3 basic assumptions. That the reason we are here, the reason we wake up every day to continue reading, writing, and researching our respective fields is to change something, to transform something we are not necessarily fully satisfied with. That in our eyes, our attempts are innocent and well-intentioned. And finally, that while we attempt to conduct research to enact some form of change, we might actually make things worse. I want to use this opportunity to focus on 3 main arguments. First, that internationalization in its current form and approaches within UK higher education is exploitative, unethical, and mobilizes the international label for neoliberal purposes. Second, that the ongoing reliance on the label as a marker of difference, alongside the flawed conceptualizations of culture speak in higher education, reinforce stereotypes, reify categories, dehumanize individuals, and justify deficit. And third, that the combination of aggressive neoliberal internationalization and the mobilization of the international label to impose a narrative of difference that justifies problematic fee structures and differential treatment is undermining the UK higher education institutions and leading to what I can only lightly describe as an unprecedented crisis. So let's look at some numbers. In front of you are statistics that demonstrate student numbers in terms of status. That's chart 1. And the tuition percentages they contribute to higher education. That's chart 2. These were extracted from the Higher Education Statistics Agency website and are publicly accessible. What you will notice from this is that the percentage of tuition from international students in recent years, take 2022, 23 in particular, is almost similar to that of home students. Although international students, cohorts, make up only 25% of the total student population within the same period. This is the elephant in the room. The fact that the very existence of international students in UK higher education is not predicated on whatever noble internationalization agenda the sector is constantly trying to project. This, by extension, is what worries me when I look at the literature. Why do we obsess with international students? Is it really because we care, or is it because the money is there? Now, this is definitely not news to many of you, but in order for us to have any meaningful discussion about students' experiences, internationalization endeavors, or higher education in general, we need to first acknowledge this neoliberal rationality that, in Brown's words, challenges the very idea of public good. We are increasingly being distanced from an ethical endeavor to educate people. while simultaneously getting used to a reality where higher education serves as a de facto capitalist industry or an educational factory. This is not news for students that make the decision to study in UK universities either. All students I interviewed as part of my doctoral research were aware of this neoliberal rationality. Expressions along the lines of a foreigner who pays to get a degree, take my money and give me a certificate. They do know that these people are willing to pay the amount of money to gain access to education in the UK. They are using us a little bit to gain something for themselves. You are paying for that certificate. They know that those coming from a third world country would do whatever it takes to have the certificate. We are bringing in a lot of money. Why do you take from A more than you take from B? Just because of nationality. It is business, education has become business. All of these were expressions that students associated with the international label. Being labeled different simply justifies a different fee structure. But does it justify a fee structure that is not capped? Where international student fees are used to subsidize home students, where some degrees cost those labeled international more than 7 times higher than home student rates. Does the label justify deficit narratives? Is it ethical to use the label as a marker of difference? The mobilization of the international label at face value is not a problem that we encounter within institutional discourses, promotional materials, and administrative jargon only. It is a problem that paints the research we do and the decisions we make when we decide to conduct research that involves students labeled international. It is a problem that shapes the preconceptions we hold about certain students, what we expect from them, how we explain their behavior, and what learning or lack of takes place because of this assumption. The problem with the label is that it allows us to look at students as a problem. The international label, alongside similar markers of nationality and ethnicity, allow us to use the mighty they. They don't speak good English. They don't think critically. They are silent. They are collectivist. The label does not only homogenize beings under a grossly simplistic suite of common descriptions, but it also detaches us from realizing that we are talking about human beings. They suddenly become the Chinese, the Japanese, the Arabs. My classroom is not diverse at all. I only have Chinese. They are silent because of their nationality. I have been reading policy reports from think tanks and advisory committees for the last 6 years or so. And I have never come across a report that does not justify international students' very existence on account of the money they bring to the UK. These are reports painted with all sorts of numbers. As you see in this example, which shows the impact of international students in 2021-2022 academic year. 37.4 billion, 33.5 billion, 40%, 125,000, numbers, numbers, numbers. That's what comes with the label. In the words of Alex, a PhD candidate who took part in my research, to the university, I'm just a number. So as an individual, you're just a number in the system. And even when those labeled international find themselves subject to more structural disadvantage, many of us who jump to the rescue to defend their presence make use of the same neoliberal narrative to justify their presence. Their economic contribution is a priority. It is what keeps them relevant as a group. We legitimize one's very being through the lens of neoliberalism. As you can see in the post shared by Universities UK in response to the Home Office decision to prevent students from bringing in their family with them. So, I think it's about time for me to redefine internationalization. For the last 2 decades or so, the most cited and used definition of internationalization is the one by Knight where internationalization is defined as the process of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, functions, or delivery of post-secondary education. Later on, this was slightly expanded by Hans de Wit and colleagues, who highlighted that the purpose of internationalization is to enhance the quality of education and research for all students and staff, and to make a meaningful contribution to society. Now, looking at the reality of higher education in the UK, my definition of internationalization is that it is a process that strives to systematically exploit non-UK domiciled students by mobilizing nationality as a marker of difference, maintaining a state of differential treatment, subscribing to deficit narratives, and exploiting students financially to prevent the collapse of neoliberal educational institutions. Subjective opinion, of course. So far in the literature and the kinds of research that involves students labeled international, there is a common and unproblematized tendency to homogenize, to use the label as an innocent marker of difference. Research participants, research scope and focus, theoretical frameworks, research methods, analysis, interpretation, discussion sections are influenced by the assumption that we put forward as researchers when we use the label to homogenize. This is one of the most dangerous implications of taking the label at face value. We end up with a starting point that adopts preconceptions. Just read through publications in the fields of higher education studies, internationalization, intercultural studies, ELT for half an hour to realize that we use the label to homogenize, to assume that those labeled international make up a cohort of individuals who are either similar in terms of experiences they undergo or who need to be studied in isolation as a group. This is what I call organized difference, borrowing from Sewell JR's amazing book, The Logics of History, where in chapter 5, Sewell reminds us of the large scale of institutions, just like this institution and many other institutions, with agents like us and many other agents, whose sole role is to order meaning. Sewell goes on to argue that the typical cultural strategy of dominant actors and institutions is not so much to establish uniformity as it is to organize difference. They, us, agents and institutions, are constantly engaged in efforts not only to normalize or homogenize, but also to hierarchize, encapsulate, exclude, criminalize, hegemonize, or marginalize practices and populations that diverge from the sanctioned ideal. And when we don't do so, we tolerate so. The international label is not an innocent administrative marker. It is an indicator of a politically imposed category that, in addition to other mechanisms, justify and impose a differential reality. It imposes a differential reality on a homogenized, but not necessarily homogeneous group of individuals. It is homogenized because of the structural forces that impose the same set of mechanisms on individuals labeled international. It is not necessarily homogeneous because these individuals and their trajectories signal a plethora of standpoints that approach and navigate these mechanisms differently. The status of students labeled international in UK higher education is that of the necessarily different other. This legitimizes the processes of exclusionary inclusion, in the words of Kneebone, whereby those perceived as an other are construed as persons outside our idea of community and shared values, as persons who are defined into legal systems by their status as outsiders rather than as potential citizens. The state of alienation that students labeled international constantly endure is a manifestation of what can be considered an organized difference. When we use the label as a starting point in research, scholarship, teaching, or just to have an informal discussion with or about students, we end up trapping our very narratives and assumptions about complex beings. We end up attempting to organize complexity. It is not that we only engage in organizing difference, we also try to explain behavior, in many cases using problematic means such as individuals' ethnicity or religion or culture or origins and presumed national cultures to either predict or describe behaviors. In so doing, and in the words of Bauman, all agency seems to be absent, and culture becomes an imprisoning cocoon or a determining force. We essentialize the other, turn them into a cultural artifact, one that we are obliged to define or confine, one that we need to help cope with our own space, adapt to our own ways of being, and eventually integrate. By approaching students with the intention to find and explain difference, we indirectly assume that we are homogeneous as a space, that the only source of difference that does not belong to this space yet is that of students labeled international. The implications of this research mindset and direction is what I call the reification of a socially and administratively constructed category. An abstract marker becomes an indicator of a real group. When the marker is reified, it is no longer necessary for researchers to justify why their research participants are international students, or what they mean by being international in the first place. This also facilitates the applicability of deficit narratives about international students. Since the category is seldom challenged, even the deficit narratives that the category holds are seldom challenged. Otherness becomes a default attribute. I want to link the two arguments I addressed so far to the third argument. And in order to do that, we'll need to look at a different set of statistics. Those of us who visit the UCU website frequently, I think these days we visit it quite frequently, are probably familiar with this map. This map shows all the universities that have been through or are going through some form of restructuring, voluntary, compulsory redundancies, and so on and so forth. Frightening to say the least. Like me, you probably wake up every other day on news of faculties and departments closing down, buildings sold, and staff being made redundant. It is an existential crisis. Now, what we don't talk much of is why do we have this problem? Who's doing this to us? Who's doing this to the sector? The Office for Students report on the financial sustainability of higher education providers in England, published just months ago, predicts a 23% decline in international enrollments next academic year, with a 3.5 billion in net income reduction and 72% of higher education providers facing some form of deficit. If this modeling is correct, then the UCU map will need smaller pins to manage to include all universities. But even the Office for Students, alongside all think tanks and universities themselves, don't want to address the elephant in the room. And instead of shifting towards a preventative, ethical, and sustainable internationalization model, they choose to go the opposite way. Simply and straightforwardly put, in many instances, there is a clear link between a university's reliance on students labeled international and the potential financial problems that the institution would encounter in the short and long terms. Take, for instance, these universities in the chart: Coventry, Durham, Bristol, Aston, Birmingham, and Bradford. Sorry if you are from those universities. They were chosen randomly, really. What these universities have in common is the fact that in recent years, their reliance on international students to tackle financial deficit rose sharply, with some of these universities' most income coming from what I call exploitative internationalization. What these universities also have in common is redundancies, voluntary severance schemes, university buildings sold or rented, and massive cuts. So we cannot keep on pretending. As I highlighted in a recent paper, we have reached what I call a state of hyper-internationalisation. This is a non-sustainable process of excessive reliance on international students, to the point where the decisions that inform teaching and learning are no longer based on substantial scholarship and research, but rather dictated by the financial bottom line and the managerial decisions that university actors are obliged to implement to mitigate financial issues. eventually jeopardizing excellence and quality indicators upon which the sector is presumably leading. I want you to take this definition with you to your respective universities and to observe to what extent this is currently applying to your respective contexts. Hyper-internationalisation makes it impossible for those labelled international to escape their prescribed position within the fabric of the institution as a source of money. In this final part of my keynote, I would like to put forward 3 pleas for all of us to consider. I organized these pleas under a broad heading I chose to call EAP, Ethics for Academic Purposes. My goal behind these recommendations is to get us to work towards a more sustainable higher education sector. I understand that we may not have the capacity or capital to enact change, but I believe in the potential of working together under a common, or somehow common, or slightly common, shared narrative. My first plea is to uphold absolute alterity. This idea comes from my reading of Emmanuel Levinas, a very difficult philosopher to read for. Levinas advocates for a space where ethics serves as the first philosophy. He argues that for ethics to presuppose ontology, the self should be willing to not engage in reducing the other. He puts it this way: the strangeness of the other, his irreducibility to the I, to my thoughts and my possessions, is precisely accomplished as a calling into question of my spontaneity as ethics. What Levinas highlights, based on my own understanding here, is not that the idea that others, whoever those are exotic or out of the ordinary. Instead, he argues that for ethics to be upheld, one should not attempt to reduce the other. Others are not subjects to be subsumed under one of my categories and given a place in my world. Looking at students labeled international through the lens of absolute alterity makes them irreducible as subjects. For any attempt to explain or organize their difference may result in objectifying them. Levinas goes on, the alterity of the other does not depend on any quality that would distinguish him from me, for a distinction of this nature would precisely imply between us that community of genus which already nullifies alterity. Again, the aim behind Levinasian ethics is not a call to accept that the other is different. It is a call to acknowledge the irreducibility of the other. And this sits at the core of my second plea: to reconceptualize research with students labeled international. Any attempt to organize difference through the use of categories could result in deficit. This is very common in research that mobilizes culture as an explanatory tool to understand students' behavior. It's 2025 and we still come across positivist research that perceives individuals as cultural artifacts, pre-cultured beings, or mobilizes prescriptive models such as, for example, Hofstede's cultural dimensions to explain one's behavior. This is simply not ethical, not theoretically sound, and it eventually results in creating or sustaining what Adichie calls single stories. And this happens within research that claims to be constructivist or postmodern in nature as well. A researcher starts by claiming that everything is socially constructed and all is relative, only to later on explain individuals' behaviors by linking it to some national or ethnic culture. A phenomenon that Holliday and MacDonald described as post-positivist recidivism. Some of the current critical research that scrutinizes the position of students labeled international within universities has already shown us the strong geographical boundaries to social justice, with international students falling outside the nationally defined realm of demands for educational equality. I mean, just look at the fees to see how detached they are. This might sound surprising to many here, but in order for us to humanize international students, we need to stop obsessing about them in research. We need to invest resources and research to address the lack of equity within the structures that underlie our higher education spaces. It shouldn't take us thousands of interviews and focus groups to confirm that students labeled international are being exploited financially. The fact that the status quo is status quo makes me suspicious of our intentions in researching students' lives and experiences. The word extractive comes to mind. We need to homogenize less, to stop obsessing with the assumption that one needs to help students integrate, because that implies that we are homogeneous as a space, which we are not, that the ones who need to change or assimilate or integrate are international students. I mean, why don't we equally obsess with how cleaners belong, how to integrate security staff, how gardeners' sense of belonging is constructed within higher education? Because they don't pay the fees. My final plea is a call to stand to neoliberalism in higher education. There isn't a bigger existential danger in today's higher education sector than that of neoliberalism. At its core, neoliberal rationality knows no ally. It is a threat to us members of staff in every university role, to students regardless of their status, and to the very idea of a university as a force for public good. We have reached a time where subject areas and knowledges within those areas are left to die if they don't appeal to the neoliberal model. And in order for this to be reversed, the foundations of UK higher education need to be reconfigured. At the core of this plea is my rather radical recommendation to gradually cap international tuition fees. This is the only way to first stop dehumanizing students by justifying their very presence via their financial contribution. And second, for higher education institutions and the responsible government bodies to establish a model that is not exploitative, where the legitimacy of knowledge does not depend on how much money that knowledge makes. What I find myself struggling with most, though, is the infiltration of neoliberalism into research. The two papers are included here anonymously, but you can find them online, openly list neoliberal motives as one of the main reasons why we should make sure to appeal to international students. In the first paper, the author writes, and I quote, "It is therefore salutary to ensure that Chinese students continue to find the UK appealing. This is vitally important both for the economy and the intellectual diversity and talents these students bring to the UK higher education institutions." In the second paper, the authors write, "To benefit from the economic and academic advantages that international students bring with them, higher education institutions should improve the quality of the experience that international students have and identify factors that impact their successful adjustment." This neoliberal narrative is scary, dangerous, and honestly, I have no idea which interests are being served here by looking at students as a source of money. I'm sure the intentions of these authors are not cynical. They're not bad or negative in any way. It's just too easy and indeed very seductive to reproduce a language of hierarchy and disadvantage. In order for us to move away from deficit, from looking at students as a problem, we need to rethink the current structural underpinnings of the sector. This has nothing to do with students. It is all about the language we use and in the institutional structures we choose to tolerate. Thank you.
Wow. Again, you're making me feel quite emotional.
Thank you. Sorry.
They've been trying to make me cry all morning and you've succeeded. Okay, so I'm going to take my teary eyes around the room and open up for questions, comments, thoughts. You got your hand up very quickly, so I'll come over to you.
Hello. Very emotional, and partly emotional because I was an international student. I was in non-UK, non-EU, and on the equality and diversity forms, I had to tick the lovely option of other white. And I was a mature student as well. So everything was wrong there. However, as a person working at university now I do appreciate what you're saying about the label. What can we do? We are, as practitioners, are working, with so many stakeholders working within the deficit model and, already, trying to be inclusive, doing social justice, lots of initiatives there. It's more of a just, okay, yes, it's unfair, but UKVI, university stakeholders, international office, these structures are in place,
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your experience. I mean, what can we do? If I have an answer to that, probably I'll be a deputy vice chancellor somewhere. What can we do? I think the first thing we need to do is to talk about it more. That's the first thing, and to not hide it really. There's no need to hide discussions that draw on deficit, because it's only through discussing that we can actually dismantle it in the first place. So starting with us as a community together, and again, it's like, what can we do? Is we are here. We are still, many here probably are on very precarious contracts, but many are also established and on very safe contracts. And the last thing we want is next year is like, why didn't we do? Instead of saying, what can we do? We might end up saying, why didn't we do anything? It's like, now I'm redundant and I have nothing to work for. So that's what's scaring me as well. So, and I think you've been through the system, and you've been through the process of being looked at as international, so you're already aware of what happens to international students. It's more raising awareness about that, about the fact that it's not fair, but the fact that there is a parameter to social justice, that within our institutions, when we talk about social justice, we talk a lot about EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion. When you map that into the experiences of students labeled international, you realize that it doesn't apply. It's like the beginning, the starting point is not equal at all, because students are not just paying for their education, they're paying for home students' education and paying for way more than home students' education, basically. How we make things worse is that when we claim that we are equal, diverse, and inclusive. Sarah Ahmed talks about these non-performative acts. When we assume that we are equal, we kind of advance a non-performative act. We basically cover ourselves, well, we are equal, but at the same time, there's a bunch of people who are not equal at all at the same time. So we have hidden their experience by saying that we are equal as a space, which shouldn't happen, really. Yeah, I hope I answered you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I'm Karen. Thank you for a really provocative talk. I have a question about frameworks that you've used, because recently I came across the idea of Derrida's hospitality, where you've got complete unconditional hospitality versus conditional hospitality, and it's been a really useful concept for me to understand some of the dilemmas that I come across in my day-to-day work. I understand, but I'm not an expert by any means, that his ideas come from Levinas, and I wondered whether you'd come across that and what made you stick with Levinas. I'm just really interested to pick your brains.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with Derrida, but a bit familiar with Levinas. Levinas is someone I'm reading for recently a lot. When I started the first time researching the experiences of students labeled international, I started with critical realism with Margaret and Roy, because it felt for me that as much as I want life to be so constructive and that reality to be completely socially constructed by agents who create whatever reality they want, I wasn't in that position. I cannot just cross, home lanes or UK citizens' lanes in an airport. I cannot just choose to not pay £4,000 every 2.5 years to just stay in the UK, for example. So I felt like constructivism didn't help me in any way. Critical realism kind of gave me that freedom to say that there are some mechanisms out there that prevent me from constructing whatever reality I want. But at the same time, I can negotiate those to a certain extent. when I moved to Levinas, I felt that Levinas could be an answer. It's like instead of just me standing here and saying, giving you the problems, is to actually think about an answer, think about what we could do moving forward. And Levinas gives us this idea of absolute alterity, that the other cannot be reduced. And that happens literally right now. It's like nobody here would turn to their best friend or colleague and try to reduce them as an individual. They appreciate their complexity as beings. When it comes to international students, though, we use the label to refer to them as they. Like from the very beginning, they are assumed to be humans who are all different by virtue of their label and who should be studied together as a group who is homogeneous, basically. So that's how I approached Levinas, to kind of try to challenge that. But when it comes to Derrida, to be honest, I'm not familiar with that. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
What I'm really interested in is thinking about how the label they is reductionist, but the impact of the we on you know, in that kind of tension between who do we think we are and how we're kind of impoverishing. You know, it's equally as impoverishing to think of there's an us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this would take me to a bigger discussion about labels. I hate all kinds of labels. I mean, you probably got that feeling. It's not just the international, really. All categories. I mean, I understand from a Spivakian approach of strategic essentialism the political importance of a label. It's like a label of a woman or a man or a black or any category is politically important because there are structural disadvantages where the label is important for us to create some form of social justice. But for me, I go a little bit step forward. Like, but is the label representative of a self, of a being? For me, it doesn't work that way. When I trap people into categories, I feel that's very, very reductionist, be it for international or be it for anyone. And I think I gave a comment to Will a couple of days ago about ratiolinguistics, and I made the same thing about labels, is that, yeah, I'm for social justice as long as it doesn't have any parameter, basically. So when we say, for example, I'll deviate a bit from international students and move to language. When we say, for example, the native speaker and the model of the ideal speaker is the white middle-class man. For me, that's very reductionist, basically. If two white middle-class men apply for the same job, there is a high likelihood or chance that they will be categorized. If somebody's from Liverpool, somebody from London, there is a probability that the person from Liverpool will be demonized because of their Liverpool accent, for example. But if I trap the white, middle-class aged man as only a powerful being who can only decide, you know, what goes, what doesn't go, I feel that I have already put a parameter to social justice. It doesn't serve me as an oppressed in the first place. It also puts me in a position as a non-white middle-class man, as only a victim. I can only be a victim in my space. I cannot be a source of power. I cannot be myself in a way hegemonic in one way or another, basically. So yeah, as much as there is violence against the they, there is violence against the we as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more comment or question, if anybody has anything they'd like to add.
Hi, Ramsey. Thanks so much for your talk. I loved it, and I absolutely agree with you. We've got to denaturalise labels, get away from labels. And just before I ask my question, I wanted to say one other really important thing that we all can do is to join a union, in my opinion. So I think everyone should join a union. But yeah, what I wanted to ask then, like thinking about Paulo Freire, he said, like, one of the things the oppressed need to be able to do is to be able to name their oppression and talk about the source of that oppression. And I suppose that does involve naming labels or structures that exist in order to break them down. I know it's a bit of a contradiction. What do you think about that?
I think naming oppression or establishing the perimeter of oppression, it's fine. Like for me, yeah, it does make sense. I was talking about structural disadvantages that students labeled international face, but what I didn't do is that I trapping all international students under a narrative of lack or a narrative of absence or a narrative that they are not good enough, for example. Because that's for me, that's the fear in social justice, is that we seem to be unidirectional in many ways, and I know the next argument is going to make me very unpopular for many people, especially post-colonialists. But for me, for example, when we use a label as Western, yeah, or when we use like the global North as a label, what are we going at? Like my wife sitting here to support me is from Lithuania, and Lithuania has been colonized as a space. In circles, when my wife is labeled as a global North, it really demonizes her for no reason. Like it makes her alien while she's been subject to colonialism just like me, which doesn't make sense to me. I feel the labels are very much trapping, as much as historically they serve as a good starting point. For example, the idea of Western colonialism, I feel like it makes me powerless. It makes me a victim once more. It makes history start from the 1600s. Why doesn't it start from the 1500s? Why does it start from the 1400s? Why does it start when the Muslim dynasty moved to Spain? Suddenly, we kind of trap who is the powerful and who is not the powerful, and while thinking that we are bringing some form of social justice, I feel that we are just trapping people to be forever alien or forever other or forever powerless, basically. They cannot be anything but powerless as beings, which for me is a big parameter to social justice.
Okay, I'm going to say thank you so much. And there was a comment from an anonymous person on SpotMe just saying what a great choice it was to have Jenna and Ramsey as our keynotes, and I hope that you all feel the same, because I certainly do. So let's thank Ramsey, and then we can have some lunch.